One of the principles of the Jewish tradition has always been that of hakarat hatuv, gratitude, to be able to say thank you when thank you is in place. In the last few weeks, especially after the war between Israel and the terrorist organization Hamas in Gaza, we have seen an onslaught from the direction of public opinion and the supposed intelligentsia against Israel, arguing utter nonsense. We've seen people like Trevor Noah of The Daily Show and John Oliver on HBO echoing arguments that have nothing to do with reality, and we kept on looking at the screen thinking to ourselves, how could it be that they cannot see the absolute obvious?
Thank God Israel treats its Arab citizens better than Egypt, Syria, or Saudi Arabia treat their Arab citizens. I didn't see much of that in the press, so I was glad to see you say it. Can you put some bones on that? Why do you say they treat their citizens better?
That's where it's becoming interesting and also a bit fun to watch, because Bill decides to start the discussion with quoting a piece from KRISTOF column on the issue that was published in the Times about a week and a half ago. But of course the article was scathingly critical of Israel, and yet Bill chooses to focus on the one paragraph that actually praises Israel. Check out Nicholas KRISTOF's response.
They're Arab citizens.
So, I also said a lot more, and clearly within Israel, then Arab citizens obviously vote, they can serve in the Knesset, they can be judges.
Thank you so much, Nicholas. Thank you. I know how difficult that was for you, but really appreciate the effort of acknowledging the truth about Israel.
I made that point for context. I think it's important to understand that that Israel at home truly is robust. But, you know, I don't think that's a defense for Israel engaging in possible war crimes in Gaza or engaging...
Well, Gaza fired 4,000 rockets into Israel. What would you say Israel should have done instead of what they did?
And that's exactly the point. This is what all of these pundits who lecture Israel from the comfort of their armchairs in Chicago or New York miss. Because really, what would you do if over 4,000 missiles were directed at you indiscriminately, trying to attack, kill, and injure as many innocent civilians as possible? That question is yet to be answered.
So,
how could you not commit?
So, international lawyers are pretty clear that they have a right to defend themselves. They have a right to respond at military targets, but there was a sense that the response was probably a war crime because it did not sufficiently avoid civilian casualties.
Now that's making quite the claim based on absolutely nothing, for you do not know, it's only been a couple of days. So what on earth leads you to that conclusion? Not to mention the fact that in an interview, the director of UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency in Gaza itself, says otherwise, that the attacks were extremely precise and did not mean at harming any civilians. Not to mention this.
تسأل المسؤول ونقول له احنا يعني 10 دقائق ما حيصير شيء بين الساعة 3 والساعة 3 و10 العمارة مش حترجع تاني خلاص يعني احنا بدنا 4 تنفار بس 4 وكلهم لابسين الدروع مش حيروحوا يجيبوا أجهزة قتالية ولا حيجيبوا كاميراتهم وشغلهم هذول كانوا في بث مباشر يعني
You saw? Show me one army in the world that behaves like this. That not only do they give you a notice before they bombard those military targets from which Hamas is firing missiles indiscriminately against Israel and Israeli civilians, but they actually take requests on the phone to delay the bombing because somebody needs to get their laptop. Seriously? If it weren't so unbelievably tragic, it would be almost funny.
But they purposely put the rockets in civilian places. That's their strategy.
Well, likewise, Israel's defense ministry is in a civilian area. Both sides do this, partly because they're crowded countries. I do think that Hamas particularly does this, and I think that's a war crime on the part of Hamas.
No. KRISTOF, you do not get off so easily on this one. You are not making any comparisons between Hamas, terrorist organization, and the Israel Defense forces. Israel does not fire from within civilian population. Israel does not hide behind civilian population when it defends itself. The fact that Israel's defense ministry happens to be in a city in Israel, it's a bureaucracy. It's not a military installation from which Israel launches attacks. That's very, very, very different from what Hamas is doing, hiding behind baby strollers, kids, hospitals and schools, and makes sure to put all of the weapons there so that useful idiots in international media like yourself and others would take a look at this and say, hey, the situation seems to be similar. It is not. There is no comparison whatsoever. And this is where Bill Maher really gets more credit, because not only doesn't he take Nicholas KRISTOf analysis and ridiculous accusations head on when it comes to Hamas in Gaza, but he also takes issue with the general scheme of things and the accusations against Israel.
I would submit that Israel did not steal anybody's land. This is another thing I've heard in the last couple of weeks, words like occupiers and colonizers and apartheid, which I don't think people understand the history there. The Jews have been in that area of the world since about 1200 BC.
Thank you. Just thank you. Thank you. Really. Thank you.
Hamas's charter says they just want to wipe out Israel. Their negotiating position is you all die.
And that's also a fact that people tend to forget. A lot of these advocates for Palestinians. Who is Hamas and what is Hamas? Is it a viable negotiating partner for Israel? No! It's a murderous terrorist organization whose desire is genocide. So anybody marching on the streets supporting Hamas, he is supporting genocide. No less. Genocide.
But, I mean, there's a difference between defending Hamas, which I agree commits war crimes, and I would accept that. I think too often in liberal circles there's been a tendency to elide the repression of Hamas, the homophobia of Hamas, the misogyny of Hamas. But that also does not excuse Israel ruling Palestinians in the West Bank, for example.
Okay, two quick things to deconstruct here. One, it's just beautiful to see how Bill Maher is forcing Nicholas KRISTOf to not only say some kind things about Israel, but also acknowledge the inconvenient truth when it comes to what Hamas really is. But then this connection between what's happening in Gaza and the West Bank. You may think what you want about what's happening in the West Bank between Israel and the Palestinians, but that has got nothing to do with the Gaza Strip. Israel, to remind all of you, and especially you, Nicholas KRISTOf, withdrew from the Gaza Strip. Israel removed forcibly thousands of Israelis out of Gaza Strip in the hope that Palestinians will show the world what kind of self-governance they're capable of. Well, unfortunately and tragically for Israelis, but also for Palestinians in Gaza and beyond, they have shown what kind of governance they're capable of. And more than that, they have shown the level of betrayal that Israel has been exposed to, because when Israelis withdrew from Gaza, we were promised by the Israeli government that whatever happens, we will have full legitimacy to defend ourselves. And what happened as a result? We get you, Nicholas KRISTOf, sitting there accusing Israel of possible war crimes without showing a shred of evidence or proof, and telling Israelis that they cannot rely on you. So what happens now? Are you asking Israelis to do the same in the West Bank? Withdraw from parts of the West Bank, creating another potential Hamastan in the West Bank from which missiles will be fired into Israel? And then what? We're going to defend ourselves and you're going to come out with another wonderful column in the New York Times accusing Israel of possible war crimes? Seriously?
The two-state solution has been on the table a number of times. There could be an Arab capital in East Jerusalem now if Yasser Arafat had accepted that in 2003.
Indeed. Israel has been offering the Palestinians and the Arab world peace time and time and time again. On numerous occasions, it came forth expressing its desire to reach peace with its neighbors, reaching out its hand for peace, and every time Israel has been ferociously attacked in the hope that something is going to bring Israel down, whether it's wars, terrorism, boycott movements, or any other kind of warfare that may bring down the Jewish state. But I can assure you of one thing: there is nothing stronger than the Jewish resolve to live in our homeland, the state of Israel, and to secure Israel, for we know the kind of gift that we've been given. Now it's incumbent upon the Palestinians to wake up from their hallucinations and to understand that Israel is going nowhere. Now the last bit, for me, said it all.
That's where the progressives are. Bella Hadid and her friends would run screaming to Tel Aviv if they had to live in Gaza for one day.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So thank you so much, Bill Maher, for speaking up, for saying the truth, and for standing up for Israelis and for Palestinians who suffer under Hamas's rule in Gaza. In the Jewish spirit of Hakarat HaTuv, of gratitude, thank you. Toda Rabba.